Naomi Williams, a self-made billionaire and the visionary behind Full Grace, a renowned fashion empire celebrating plus-sized beauty, stepped onto the polished floor of Skylux Airline's private terminal with the poise of a woman who had weathered countless storms. Dressed in a sophisticated blue designer dress that draped elegantly over her curves, she exuded confidence. Yet beneath her outward composure lay memories of struggles, whispered judgments, and a ceaseless battle against a world that too often measured worth by appearance. On this seemingly routine flight, Naomi hoped to reclaim a moment of serenity in the clouds. As she navigated the sleek corridors of the business-class cabin, every detail spoke of luxury: plush leather seats, ambient lighting, and the quiet hum of expectation. But almost immediately, a ripple of disquiet permeated the air. Seated across the aisle, a sharply dressed man cleared his throat in an ostentatious display of irritation. His voice, laced with condescension, broke the cabin's hushed atmosphere. "Excuse me, miss, are you absolutely sure you're in the right seat?" he inquired, his tone betraying an assumption that she did not belong among those granted the privilege of such comfort. Naomi paused, her heart thumping in sync with the subtle clatter of service carts. In that brief moment, every memory of the discrimination she had fought so hard to overcome came rushing back. Yet, she held her head high. With a calm smile that masked her inner turmoil, she responded, "I paid for this seat, sir. I belong right here." Despite her measured tone, the words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. A flight attendant, Emily, soon approached with a hesitant look in her eyes, as if torn between duty and empathy. "Ma'am, there appears to be a seating issue," she said softly, glancing around as if expecting support from her colleagues. Naomi's pulse quickened. It wasn't the first time she had encountered condescension on a flight, but something about today felt different, an undercurrent of hostility that was hard to ignore. As Naomi settled into her plush seat, her eyes scanned the cabin, noting the furtive glances and lowered voices among fellow passengers. Each whispered comment seemed to echo a judgment she had long since learned to ignore. But then, without warning, the situation escalated. A supervisor strode down the aisle, his authoritative tone brooking no argument. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," he declared. In that moment, the luxurious cocoon of business class transformed into a stage for humiliation. Naomi felt as though invisible barriers, long hidden behind polite smiles, had burst into full view. Reluctantly, she gathered her belongings. The weight of every gaze, every murmured word, pressed down on her as she walked toward the exit. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the injustice unfolding within those narrow confines of an airplane. At the gate, with her suitcase in hand and disbelief settling in like a heavy fog, Naomi's mind raced. Questions and anger warred within her. Was this truly a misunderstanding? Had her status, her achievements, or her appearance become the target of such blatant prejudice? The humiliation was profound, yet beneath it simmered a fierce determination, a silent vow that this injustice would not go unanswered. In that charged moment, as the aircraft's door closed behind her, Naomi Williams unknowingly embarked on a journey that would change not only her life but also challenge the very norms of an entire industry. At the bustling airport gate, the chill of early morning air did little to cool the fire that had ignited within Naomi. Seated on a cold bench, her eyes locked onto the glow of her smartphone screen. Social media platforms had erupted into a frenzy. Tweets, posts, and viral hashtags, #NaomiWilliamsScam, #TooBigToFly, #SkyLuxDiscrimination, flooded her timeline. Every notification brought with it a mix of outrage, pity, and cruel amusement from strangers who were witnessing her public humiliation. Her assistant, Lillian, perched beside her, scrolling furiously through the updates. "Ms. Williams, your PR team is drafting a statement," Lillian murmured, her voice edged with both concern and urgency. "They're trying to frame this as a mere misunderstanding. They suggest a neutral tone, saying it was a one-off error." Naomi's lips curled into a bitter smile as she recalled the moment on the plane, the dismissive tone of the flight attendant, the cold authority in the supervisor's eyes, and the unspoken message that she was not welcome in spaces reserved for those deemed suitable. "A misunderstanding," she scoffed softly. "They dragged me off that plane in front of everyone. This isn't just a slip-up, it's a statement." Her eyes darted across the screen to an email notification that had just arrived. With a hesitant tap, Naomi opened the attachment. It was a leaked internal document from Skylux Airlines, and as she scrolled through its contents, her blood ran cold. The document detailed policies and metrics that laid bare a disturbing pattern: Passengers were being selectively removed based on their size, race, and perceived fit for luxury. There were statistical charts, cryptic codes, and memos discussing undesirable clientele. Every line reinforced what Naomi had long suspected, that behind the veneer of premium service lay a network of systemic discrimination. The reality of the situation hit her hard. This was not an isolated incident or a mere error of judgment. It was a deliberate act, woven into the very fabric of the airline's policies. Naomi felt a surge of anger, not just for herself, but for every passenger who had suffered under these prejudiced practices. Her mind raced with memories of past encounters, subtle and overt, that had left scars invisible to many but searing to those who experienced them. In the midst of the social media storm, Naomi also noted the duality of public reaction. While a significant number of voices expressed support, demanding justice and change, a darker undercurrent of ridicule and cynicism persisted. "She's just overreacting," some posts claimed, while others speculated on her credibility and motives. Yet, amidst the cacophony of conflicting opinions, one truth stood out clearly: the world was watching, and the digital chorus was now a powerful force demanding accountability. Lillian's hand trembled slightly as she scrolled, and Naomi reached out to squeeze her assistant's shoulder in a silent gesture of reassurance. "This isn't the end," Naomi whispered, her voice firm despite the tremor of anger beneath. "It's only the beginning." In that moment, with the weight of public scrutiny and the stark evidence of institutional bias in her hands, she realized that her personal fight was evolving into a much larger battle for justice. As the plane's departure was long past, Naomi resolved to take decisive action. The leaked document was proof enough, proof that the policies of Skylux were not only discriminatory but calculated. In the harsh glare of the airport's fluorescent lights, surrounded by a sea of uncertain faces and echoing digital voices, Naomi vowed to confront this injustice head-on. The storm on social media was merely a prelude to a battle that would soon spill into boardrooms, courtrooms, and beyond. And Naomi, with unwavering determination and a heart ablaze with righteous fury, was ready to lead the charge. In the quiet sanctuary of a secluded cafe away from the prying eyes of the media, Naomi met with Daniel, a discreet industry insider known for unveiling hidden truths. The cafe's ambience was understated yet refined, with soft jazz playing in the background and the gentle clink of porcelain punctuating their hushed conversation. Daniel's eyes held a mixture of sympathy and urgency as he slid a manila folder across the table toward her. "Ms. Williams," he began, his tone measured but laden with implication, "what I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew." Naomi's fingers trembled as she reached for the folder. Inside lay a trove of evidence that struck her like a physical blow. The documents were bank statements, internal communications, and detailed financial transfers. As she pored over the figures, her heart sank with the realization that her husband, Mark Hudson, had been channeling substantial sums of money from his personal accounts into private organizations that were closely linked with Skylux Airlines. These organizations, hidden behind layers of shell companies and discrete contracts, were designed to promote exclusivity and reinforce elitist policies in high-end industries. "You're saying Mark was complicit?" Naomi whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. Daniel nodded solemnly. "Yes. Not only was he involved, but he also actively supported, if not orchestrated, the very policies that led to your removal from that flight. He ensured that Skylux's criteria remained skewed in favor of a narrow discriminatory view of who deserved luxury. It wasn't about safety or comfort at all, it was about exclusion." Each word felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. For years, Naomi had built her empire on the belief that success was a testament to overcoming prejudice, that beauty was defined not by conventional standards but by strength and authenticity. To discover that the man she had once trusted implicitly had used their partnership, and by extension her name, to reinforce discriminatory practices was a revelation that shattered her heart. The room felt colder, the soft jazz now a mournful dirge punctuating the unraveling of a long-held illusion. As Daniel continued, he detailed the financial web with painstaking clarity, large untraceable transfers that, when cross-referenced with internal memos, painted a damning picture of deliberate bias. "This money wasn't donated for charity, Ms. Williams," Daniel explained. "It was strategically funneled to ensure that Skylux's policies would remain profitable by maintaining an exclusive clientele, one that conveniently excluded those who didn't fit their narrow standards." Naomi's eyes burned with a mix of fury and sorrow. "All these years I believed that my success was built on merit, on proving that anyone, regardless of size or background, deserved to feel beautiful and valued. And yet, while I was fighting external prejudice, I was blind to the betrayal within my own home. In that charged moment, as she sat in the quiet hum of the cafe, Naomi felt her resolve crystallize. The evidence in her hands was not just a document, it was a call to arms, a declaration that the fight against discrimination was far from over. Mark's involvement added an unbearable personal sting to the injustice. It was as if every cruel whisper and every humiliating glance from that fateful flight had been orchestrated by someone she had once loved and trusted. With the folder clutched tightly, Naomi's mind raced with possibilities. This betrayal would not be swept under the rug. She vowed to expose the truth, not only to dismantle the oppressive policies of Skylux, but also to reclaim her personal dignity and integrity. As she left the cafe that day, a newfound determination pulsed through her veins. The road ahead would be treacherous, paved with personal loss and public battles, yet Naomi was ready. The fight against a system built on exclusion had become deeply personal. Back in the quiet solitude of her penthouse, under the dim glow of designer lamps and surrounded by reminders of her hard-earned success, Naomi prepared herself for the confrontation that had been long overdue. The evidence of betrayal burned brightly on the coffee table, a stark contrast to the familiar elegance of her surroundings. With trembling resolve, she picked up her phone and dialed Mark's number. Each ring echoed like a toll of finality, until finally, his voice answered with the detached calm of a man accustomed to command. "Mark, I need an explanation," Naomi said, her tone firm yet laced with raw emotion. "I have seen everything, every document, every transaction. How could you be involved in this discriminatory scheme?" There was a long, measured silence on the other end. When Mark finally spoke, his voice was cool, almost clinical. "Naomi, you of all people should understand, this isn't personal. It's business." "But it is personal, Mark." Naomi's voice cracked under the weight of her heartbreak. "You married me, at least I thought for the right reasons. I believed in us, in our shared vision for a better world, one that celebrated diversity and inclusivity. Yet here you are, justifying an entire system that excludes people like me." Mark sighed, as if burdened by the inevitability of the conversation. "You must understand, our clients expect a certain standard. It's not about me or even about you, it's about maintaining an image, a brand. The market demands exclusivity. Business, Naomi, is ruthless. Sometimes, sacrifices have to be made." Every word felt like a dagger. Naomi's mind raced back to the humiliating moments on that flight, to the countless instances where she had fought to be seen as equal. "Sacrifices," she repeated, incredulous. "I sacrificed my trust, my love, everything, while you helped build a system that deliberately excludes people who don't fit your narrow criteria. How can you call that business?" A bitter laugh resonated from Mark's end. "Isn't it obvious? This is how the world works. You need to be willing to make tough choices if you want to succeed. I didn't create this policy to hurt you, it was a necessary measure to preserve the brand's reputation and, frankly, our bottom line." Naomi's heart pounded in her ears. The rationality he presented was chilling in its callousness. "I built my empire on the belief that every person deserves dignity, that true luxury is inclusive. You've used our success as a cover to perpetuate discrimination, and now you expect me to accept it." There was another pause, a silence filled with the weight of a marriage crumbling under the strain of betrayal. "You're overreacting, Naomi," Mark finally said, his tone defensive. "Maybe you should remember that you married me for my influence, for the image of being the progressive CEO with a successful, influential wife by his side. That image isn't something you can dismantle over a few unfortunate incidents." The words stung with a harsh clarity. "No, Mark," she replied, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I am not overreacting. I'm standing up for what's right. You've built a system that marginalizes people, people like me, people like so many who have been forced to hide or fight for basic respect. And I won't stand by while you continue to justify this injustice." As the silence stretched on, the line between personal loss and systemic betrayal blurred. Naomi felt her pulse quicken, her determination hardening. "I want to hear it from you," she said finally, voice steady despite the hurt. "Explain why you chose business over humanity, why you allowed your own home to become a breeding ground for exclusion." For what seemed like an eternity, Mark said nothing. When he finally spoke, it was with an air of resignation that made Naomi's blood run cold. "This is how the market demands things be," he said softly, as if reciting a tired mantra. You may not like it, but it's the reality of our industry. In that moment, Naomi realized that the man she had once trusted had become an embodiment of the very forces she had fought against for so long. The call ended, leaving behind a chasm of silence and shattered illusions. Alone in her penthouse, with the city lights flickering outside her window, Naomi vowed that this confrontation was only the beginning of a battle that would not be confined to private conversations. The injustice, both personal and systemic, demanded a reckoning, and she was ready to lead the charge. The next morning, with the dawn barely breaking through the city skyline, Naomi Williams walked into the headquarters of Full Grace with a resolve that could not be shaken. The corridor was filled with hushed whispers as employees glanced at her, each face a mix of concern and admiration. Today was not just another day at the office. Today marked the beginning of a revolution against systemic injustice. In the conference room, cameras were already being set up by journalists from major media outlets. The stage was set for a press conference that would lay bare the discriminatory practices of Skylux Airlines and the betrayal that had rocked her personal life. Taking her place behind the podium, Naomi looked out over the sea of reporters, civil rights activists, and supporters who had gathered. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice resonant and unwavering. "Today, I stand before you not just as the CEO of Full Grace, but as a woman who has been wronged, and as an advocate for every individual who has ever been excluded from spaces they have every right to occupy." Her words rippled through the room, and she continued with deliberate clarity. "Skylux Airlines has engaged in a systematic practice of discrimination. I have obtained documents, internal memos, and financial records that prove this institution has been deliberately profiling passengers based on size, race, and appearance. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a pattern. And it's time that pattern was exposed." As Naomi laid out the evidence, she detailed how the policies were not about safety or comfort but about maintaining a prejudiced image that excluded those who did not meet an arbitrary standard of luxury. She shared statistics, how black passengers were denied upgrades at rates 5 times higher than their white counterparts, and how plus-size travelers, despite paying for premium service, were systematically marginalized. Every statistic was punctuated by the raw truth of her own experience on that fateful flight. The room grew charged with energy as her revelations sank in. Supportive murmurs and determined nods filled the air. "I am pursuing legal action," she declared firmly, "and I encourage anyone who has suffered similar discrimination to come forward. We will no longer be silenced by a system that values profit over people." Her statement was more than just an accusation, it was a call to arms. Journalists scribbled notes feverishly as Naomi outlined the next steps, emphasizing that this was not merely a personal vendetta but a necessary pushback against an industry built on exclusion. "When you expose injustice," she said passionately, "the first reaction is always backlash. They will attack those who dare to shine a light on their own biases. But together, we can force them to confront the truth and demand accountability." In that moment, Naomi's voice resonated with a power that had been forged in the fires of personal loss and betrayal. Every word she spoke was a declaration that discrimination, whether overt or hidden in corporate policy, had no place in a world striving for equality. As she concluded her press conference, the applause was not just for the evidence presented, but for the courage it took to stand alone against an entrenched system of prejudice. Stepping away from the podium, Naomi felt both the weight of her responsibility and the surge of hope that comes from knowing one is on the right side of history. The cameras flashed and microphones captured every word as she answered questions with measured precision, each response reinforcing her commitment to justice. The press conference had ignited a movement that would challenge not only Skylux Airlines but an entire industry complicit in exclusion. That day, Naomi Williams did more than fight back. She transformed her pain into a powerful beacon of change. With the truth now in the public domain, she vowed to use every resource at her disposal to ensure that future air travel, and every sphere influenced by these policies, would be defined by inclusivity and dignity. In the days that followed, the courtroom became the battleground where truth and prejudice collided. The atmosphere inside the court was electric, charged with anticipation as reporters, legal experts, and activists filled every seat. The trial had begun. A trial that would not only determine the fate of Skylux Airlines but also serve as a stark reminder that no institution was above accountability. Naomi walked into the courtroom with a quiet dignity, her presence commanding attention. Every step she took resonated with the strength of someone who had endured humiliation and betrayal and emerged determined to make a stand. The air was heavy with the collective weight of countless injustices, a weight that Naomi was now prepared to lift. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting its case. They introduced the internal memos, the statistical data, and the bank statements that meticulously documented Skylux's discriminatory practices. Each piece of evidence was laid out with clinical precision, painting a picture of an airline that systematically marginalized passengers based solely on their size, race, and perceived social fit. One statistic after another was delivered, illustrating how black passengers and plus-size travelers were routinely denied the luxury they had paid for. As the evidence was presented, the courtroom fell into a tense silence, punctuated only by the quiet scribbling of notes and the occasional murmur of disbelief. Naomi's legal team, composed of civil rights experts and dedicated attorneys, took turns emphasizing that this case was not merely about one incident. It was about a pattern of exclusion that had been allowed to flourish under the guise of safety and comfort. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Mark Hudson was called to the stand. His entrance into the courtroom sent a ripple of shock through the assembled audience. Dressed in a crisp suit, he appeared pale and exhausted, his carefully curated image now marred by the scrutiny of a courtroom that sought the truth. As he sat down, the tension was palpable. Reporters held their breath, and every eye in the room was fixed on him. When questioned by Naomi's attorney, Mark's responses were measured and guarded. "Did you in any way contribute to or approve of these discriminatory policies?" the attorney asked, his tone steady yet probing. For several excruciating moments, Mark's silence spoke louder than any words. Then, in a voice that was at once cold and resigned, he replied, "These policies were necessary for maintaining our clients' expectations." His words, though carefully chosen, were damning in their implication, revealing a man more committed to profit and image than to fairness and human dignity. Naomi listened intently from her seat in the gallery, her expression a blend of sorrow and steely resolve. The courtroom's atmosphere grew even more charged as further testimony was introduced. Former employees of Skylux recounted instances where they were specifically trained to sidestep certain passengers, and industry experts testified that the airline's safety policies were nothing more than a pretext for blatant discrimination. Every testimony reinforced Naomi's long-held belief that the system was fundamentally rigged against those who did not conform to a narrow ideal. As the trial continued, Naomi's legal team presented a series of exhibits, a timeline of discriminatory incidents, internal communications detailing the rationale behind the policies, and even anonymous recordings of conversations that revealed the casual nature of these decisions. Each exhibit was a hammer blow against the carefully constructed facade of Skylux Airlines. The prosecution's closing arguments were impassioned and relentless, urging the jury to recognize that this was not a case of miscommunication or misunderstanding, but one of systemic injustice that had been allowed to persist for far too long. The final moments of the day were marked by a heavy silence. As the judge adjourned the court for the evening, Naomi stepped outside, greeted by a throng of supporters and media representatives. In that moment, despite the uncertainty of what the next day would bring, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The trial was far from over, but the truth was finally being spoken aloud in a space where it could no longer be ignored. That evening, as Naomi walked away from the courthouse, her heart was heavy yet hopeful. The fight against systemic discrimination was entering a critical phase, and though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, she knew that every step taken in that courtroom was a step closer to justice, not only for herself, but for all those who had been silenced for too long. The courtroom hummed with an almost tangible intensity as the final day of testimony drew to a close. After days of fierce legal battles, the jury's verdict was poised to reshape not only the fate of Skylux Airlines but the lives of all those who had been subjugated by its discriminatory practices. Naomi sat in the gallery, her eyes unflinching despite the toll of months of relentless struggle. Every detail of the trial, the damning internal memos, the testimonies of former employees, the stark financial records, had been laid bare for the world to see. Now, all that remained was for the scales of justice to tip in her favor. The judge's gavel echoed through the hushed courtroom as the jury delivered its decision. Skylux Airlines was found guilty of systemic discrimination. The judge decreed not only substantial damages, but also mandated sweeping changes to the airline's policies. In that electrifying moment, the oppressive weight that had haunted Naomi for so long began to lift. Reporters erupted into a flurry of questions while supporters in the gallery cheered, their voices mingling with the rustle of hopeful whispers. Outside the courthouse, a throng of demonstrators waved banners and chanted slogans demanding justice and accountability. Naomi emerged into the daylight, her face marked by both relief and steely determination. She knew that this victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a declaration that the era of exclusion had come to an end. Amid the clamor, Naomi paused to catch her breath and let the magnitude of the moment sink in. For years, she had weathered public humiliation and personal betrayal, but now the courtroom had become the stage for the birth of a new beginning. In private interviews later that day, Naomi spoke with measured passion. "This verdict," she declared, "is not just about punishing a system built on prejudice. It's about affirming the dignity of every individual who has ever been told they don't belong. Today we have sent a message to every gatekeeper of exclusivity: we will no longer stand by while injustice is allowed to thrive." Her words resonated across news cycles and social media platforms alike, igniting discussions and fueling a burgeoning movement. Investors and civil rights groups began reaching out, eager to support the momentum of change. As the dust settled on the day's proceedings, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that the verdict was merely the beginning, a spark that would light the way toward a future where equality was not a privilege reserved for a few, but a right guaranteed to all. That evening, as twilight enveloped the city, Naomi took a quiet moment on her apartment's balcony. Looking out at the horizon, she felt both the scars of the past and the promise of a brighter future. The courtroom had been a crucible where her resolve was tested, and now, as she gazed at the twinkling lights below, she vowed that her fight would extend far beyond these walls. The injustice that had once defined her pain would now serve as the foundation for a revolution in air travel and corporate responsibility, a revolution that would soon spread to every corner of an industry steeped in exclusion. With the verdict echoing in her mind and the voices of thousands of supporters urging her onward, Naomi began to sketch plans for the next phase of her journey. She would build something entirely new, an airline that embodied the values of inclusivity, dignity, and respect. In that quiet, reflective moment, amid the fading light and the promise of a new dawn, Naomi Williams embraced the certainty that her battle was far from over. Rather, it was evolving into something far greater than she had ever imagined, a movement destined to rewrite the rules of luxury and redefine what it meant to truly belong. In the weeks following the courtroom victory, the air in the city was charged with anticipation. Investors, activists, and long-suffering travelers who had been marginalized by the old order now rallied behind a visionary new concept. Naomi's resolve had transformed into an unwavering mission, to create an airline that would stand as a beacon of inclusivity and justice, a direct antithesis to the elitist policies of Skylux. Thus, Sky for All was conceived. The transformation was not instantaneous. It was a painstaking process of gathering support, securing funding, and designing an airline that could accommodate every body type without compromise. Meetings were held in sleek boardrooms and cozy coffee shops alike, as Naomi and her team hammered out every detail. Every policy, every seat configuration, and every customer service protocol was scrutinized with one goal in mind: to create a travel experience where dignity was not an option, but a guarantee. In one particularly memorable meeting, Naomi stood before a diverse group of engineers, designers, and customer service experts. "Our mission," she declared with passion, "is to tear down the old barriers of exclusivity. Every detail in our aircraft, from the seating dimensions to the in-flight services, will be designed with comfort, accessibility, and respect at its core. This isn't just an airline, it's a movement." The room buzzed with energy, and every participant could feel the weight of the moment, the birth of a revolution in air travel. The design phase was marked by innovation and collaboration. Engineers worked closely with ergonomics experts to develop seats that adapted gracefully to different body types without sacrificing luxury. Customer service training programs were overhauled to instill empathy and inclusiveness, ensuring that every passenger would be treated with the utmost respect. The corporate identity of Sky for All was built on transparency and community input. Social media campaigns invited people from all walks of life to share their travel experiences and hopes for a more equitable future in aviation. As construction of the first fleet began, Naomi made frequent visits to the manufacturing plants and design studios. Every time she saw a prototype seat or a new cabin layout, her heart swelled with pride and anticipation. "This is more than just a business," she often reminded her team. "It's a statement to the world that luxury and inclusivity can coexist. We're not just filling seats, we're filling a void in an industry that has long forgotten what it means to care." Meanwhile, the media buzzed with curiosity and admiration. Articles hailed Naomi as a trailblazer who had turned personal agony into a force for collective empowerment. Civil rights organizations and social justice advocates lauded her initiative as a crucial step toward dismantling institutional bias. Every public announcement, every press release, carried the refrain that had become synonymous with her campaign: "Sky for All, where everyone is welcome." Yet, behind the scenes, challenges abounded. Skeptics questioned the feasibility of the project, and remnants of the old guard clung stubbornly to outdated practices. Naomi's resolve, however, remained unyielding. Late nights were spent reviewing architectural renderings, fine-tuning marketing strategies, and ensuring that every contractual detail reflected her uncompromising standards of inclusion. One evening, after a particularly long day of negotiations with potential partners in a chic downtown office, Naomi sat alone in her private study. Surrounded by sketches and proposals, she reflected on how far she had come, from the humiliation on that fateful flight to this moment of building a future that honored every individual's right to dignity. The room was silent except for the hum of the city below, and in that quiet solitude, Naomi felt the fierce certainty that her revolution was not just possible but inevitable. Sky for All was more than an airline. It was a symbol of resistance against a system that had long placed profit over people. As the blueprint of this bold new venture took shape, Naomi's vision of a world where everyone could travel without fear of judgment grew ever clearer. And as she prepared to unveil her creation to the world, the revolutionary spirit within her burned brighter than ever, a promise that the journey toward justice was just taking flight. Launch day arrived with an electric mix of anticipation and nostalgia. The very airport where Naomi had once endured public humiliation now served as the backdrop for the inauguration of Sky for All, a moment laden with symbolism and hope. The terminal was transformed for the occasion, banners declaring Sky for All, welcome to a new era hung alongside vibrant images celebrating diversity, and a stage was set for a series of speeches that would mark the dawn of a new chapter in air travel. Early in the morning, as the first light of day broke through the clouds, passengers from all walks of life began to gather. Among them were former travelers who had suffered under exclusionary policies, industry insiders curious about the new approach, and media representatives eager to capture this historic moment. Naomi arrived at the airport in a sleek, unassuming car, her presence calm yet commanding as she stepped out to face the crowd. At a designated area near the boarding gate, Naomi took a moment to absorb the scene. The air was filled with excitement and cautious optimism, a stark contrast to the cold stares of the past. Wearing a tailored suit that blended modern elegance with timeless grace, she walked to the stage with a measured step, greeted by cheers and heartfelt applause. The crowd's energy was palpable, a living testament to the transformative power of resilience and hope. Standing before an audience that spanned generations and cultures, Naomi began her address with a quiet yet powerful declaration. Today, we rewrite the narrative. No longer will anyone be made to feel unworthy or invisible because of who they are. Her voice resonated across the terminal as she recounted the painful chapters of her past, the flight where she was unjustly removed, the trial that exposed deep-seated prejudices, and the personal betrayal that nearly broke her spirit. Instead, each scar had become the foundation of her new vision, an airline where every passenger was celebrated. As the ceremony progressed, special tributes were paid to the tireless team behind Sky for All. Engineers who had painstakingly reimagined every detail of the cabin, customer service professionals trained in empathy and cultural sensitivity, and community advocates whose voices had fueled the movement, all were honored in a series of moving speeches and video montages. One particularly stirring segment showed testimonials from passengers who had once been turned away. Their words, raw and heartfelt, spoke of renewed hope and the promise of dignity in travel. The highlight of the day came when the first Sky for All aircraft, gleaming in pristine white with its bold logo proudly emblazoned on the fuselage, taxied onto the runway. In that defining moment, as the engines roared to life and the plane prepared for its inaugural flight, Naomi felt a profound sense of vindication. Here was a tangible manifestation of her dreams, a revolution carved in metal and determination, ready to soar above the clouds and redefine what it meant to travel. Before boarding, Naomi paused one final time on the tarmac. With the runway stretching before her and a clear blue sky overhead, she whispered a silent promise to every individual who had ever been made to feel unworthy. Today we take off not just as passengers, but as warriors of justice and inclusion. The aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky, carrying with it the hopes and aspirations of countless voices that had long been marginalized. As the launch event wound down and the celebratory crowd dispersed into the city's embrace, Naomi lingered for a moment, savoring the magnitude of what had been achieved. The past was a constant reminder of the battles fought and the injustices endured, yet today heralded the promise of a future where air travel, and perhaps the world itself, could be a place of equality and respect. Sky for All was not just a new airline, it was a revolution that had taken flight, a symbol of the power of persistence, and a promise that no one would ever be left behind again. In the months following the inaugural flight of Sky for All, the landscape of the airline industry began to shift in unprecedented ways. As passengers and critics alike compared the inclusive, warm environment aboard Sky for All with the cold, impersonal treatment at legacy carriers, a quiet revolution was stirring. Naomi's bold experiment was not just a business venture, it was a challenge to an entire industry that had long equated luxury with exclusion. Media outlets around the world featured in-depth stories about the new airline. Reviews highlighted how every aspect of Sky for All, from the ergonomically designed seating to the thoughtfully curated in-flight services, was engineered with a genuine commitment to accessibility and dignity. Passengers reported feeling not only physically comfortable but emotionally embraced, a feeling that contrasted sharply with the aloof treatment they had once endured on other flights. "I felt seen, I felt heard, and above all I felt respected," one passenger remarked during an interview that quickly went viral. Meanwhile, internal memos leaked from competing airlines revealed a growing sense of unease. Executives were scrambling to adapt to a new reality where exclusivity was no longer a competitive advantage but a liability. Some legacy carriers attempted to rebrand themselves with superficial diversity initiatives and glossy PR campaigns, yet insiders whispered that change was being forced upon them by shifting consumer values and regulatory pressure. The very metrics that once justified discriminatory policies, such as maximizing profit margins by catering to a narrow clientele, were now under public scrutiny. The new social media narrative, powered by hashtags of solidarity and calls for accountability, was rewriting the rules of engagement. Within industry conferences and boardrooms, experts debated the ethics and economics of inclusivity. Naomi was frequently invited to speak at high-profile panels, where she articulated a vision that fused profit with principles. "Inclusivity isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do," she explained during one such forum. "When you embrace the full spectrum of humanity, you unlock creativity, loyalty, and growth that no narrow definition of luxury can ever match." Her words resonated with a generation of consumers who had grown tired of elitism and demand transparency from the brands they trusted. Despite these strides, challenges persisted. There were those within the old guard who clung to outdated metrics of success, arguing that comfort and safety necessitated rigid policies. Yet, as the data emerged showing that Sky for All's approach not only improved customer satisfaction but also increased market share, the critics found their arguments increasingly untenable. Regulatory agencies began to take note, initiating inquiries into the discriminatory practices of long-established carriers. Legal battles, once the realm of a few courageous individuals, were now mounting as collective action groups rallied around the cause. In boardrooms worldwide, the narrative was shifting from exclusion is necessary for safety to inclusion is the cornerstone of modern business. Investors, once skeptical of a radical departure from tradition, began to pour capital into ventures that prioritized social responsibility alongside profitability. It was a paradigm shift that echoed far beyond the airline industry, a signal that society was ready to reject outdated norms and embrace a future defined by fairness and empathy. Amid these turbulent yet hopeful times, Naomi continued to work tirelessly behind the scenes. Late nights were spent reviewing new proposals, meeting with regulators, and refining the policies that made Sky for All a model for change. She never lost sight of the personal battles that had brought her to this point, the sting of humiliation, the betrayal by a trusted partner, and the many moments when she had been told she didn't belong. Now, every flight, every customer interaction, and every boardroom meeting was a testament to her relentless pursuit of justice. As the industry began its slow transformation, a sense of cautious optimism spread among consumers and advocates alike. The very idea of air travel was being reimagined, no longer as an exclusive club for the elite, but as a shared experience where every passenger was valued. And in this evolving landscape, Naomi Williams emerged not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a visionary whose courage had reshaped an industry and inspired countless others to demand better. Even as Sky for All soared to unprecedented heights, the fight for true inclusivity was far from over. The triumphs of the past months had ignited a flame that brought with it new battles, legal challenges, political pressure, and covert attempts by the old guard to undermine the revolution. Every day, Naomi faced a barrage of obstacles from entrenched interests determined to maintain the status quo. Yet each challenge only strengthened her resolve, fueling a relentless drive to secure lasting change for every marginalized traveler. Courtrooms, once the arena for exposing systemic discrimination, now buzzed with follow-up litigation. Former passengers, emboldened by Naomi's public victory, stepped forward with their own stories of humiliation and exclusion. Class action lawsuits were filed against airlines that clung to archaic policies, and civil rights groups partnered with legal teams to ensure that no injustice would go unchallenged. For Naomi, each new case was a reminder that while progress had been made, the battle was ongoing, a battle for dignity in every aspect of travel. Political pressure mounted as well. Lawmakers, responding to widespread public outcry, began proposing reforms aimed at dismantling discriminatory practices in the aviation sector. Naomi was frequently invited to testify before congressional committees, where her first-hand accounts and compelling evidence helped shape new regulatory frameworks. In these hearings, she spoke not only as a victim of prejudice, but as a leader in a movement that demanded accountability from corporations large and small. Back at Sky for All headquarters, the atmosphere was one of intense preparation. Late into the night, legal teams, PR strategists, and policy advisors huddled together, crafting responses to every emerging challenge. Every internal meeting was charged with urgency, the stakes were high, and the pressure to maintain the momentum of change was immense. Naomi, ever the steadfast leader, moved among her team with calm determination. "We have come too far to let the forces of exclusion win back ground," she reminded them in quiet, resolute tones. "Every obstacle we overcome makes our cause even stronger." Yet even as the legal and political fronts battled on, Naomi faced deeply personal trials. The scars of past betrayals, especially the painful revelation of Mark's complicity, continued to haunt her. In moments of solitude, she recalled the long nights spent grappling with feelings of isolation and heartbreak. But rather than succumb to despair, these memories became the cornerstone of her resilience. They were the fuel for her fight, a reminder that every act of discrimination, every whispered insult, had led her to this pivotal moment. Grassroots campaigns sprang up across the nation, inspired by Naomi's unwavering commitment to change. Social media platforms buzzed with calls for reform, and petitions demanding accountability in the airline industry soared to millions of signatures. Community meetings, rallies, and forums became the heartbeat of a movement that transcended business and politics. Each protest, each public demonstration of solidarity, was a declaration that the time for complacency had ended. As months turned into a relentless, hard-fought battle, Naomi found strength in unity. The collective energy of thousands of voices, each person who had once been marginalized, joined together to demand a future defined by fairness. And though the journey was arduous, every legal victory, every policy reform, served as a testament to the transformative power of perseverance. Naomi's mission had become bigger than herself. It was a beacon of hope for all who believed that inclusivity was not merely a dream, but an attainable reality. In the twilight of a long and tumultuous year, the ultimate showdown was set to unfold, a confrontation that would finally lay bare the deep wounds of betrayal and the cost of complacency. Naomi Williams, now a symbol of resilience and reform, arranged one final meeting with a man who had once been her partner in both business and life, Mark Hudson. This was not simply a private conversation, it was a moment destined to reverberate far beyond their personal history, encapsulating the very essence of the struggle against exclusion. They met in a quiet, understated conference room in a high-rise downtown, a space that had witnessed countless negotiations, yet now bore witness to a collision of ideals. Mark arrived, his appearance more subdued than in the past, as if the weight of every unspoken accusation had finally taken its toll. Naomi, poised and resolute, took her seat across from him. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity laden with memories of humiliation, betrayal, and the battle for justice. "Mark," Naomi began, her voice steady but edged with both sorrow and determination, "we have reached a crossroads. For years, I believed in us, our shared vision of success and progress. But I now see that vision was built on foundations of exclusion and prejudice. Your choices, your silence, and your complicity in policies that marginalized so many have not only betrayed me personally, but have scarred an entire community." Mark's eyes searched hers, an unspoken remorse flickering beneath his carefully controlled demeanor. "Naomi," he replied, his tone measured yet tinged with regret, "business demands choices that may seem harsh, but they are necessary in this competitive world. I did what I believed was required to sustain our image and our profits." "No," Naomi interjected, her voice rising with quiet fury. "You did what you thought would preserve a status quo that devalues human dignity. You exploited my name, our brand, to enforce a system that excluded people simply because they didn't fit a narrow mold. That is not progress, it is a betrayal of everything I stand for." The conversation grew more heated, the room charged with the energy of two worlds colliding. For Naomi, this was the culmination of a long journey, from the humiliation on that flight to the courtroom battles, from building Sky for All to challenging every form of injustice. For Mark, it was the moment when profit and legacy were forced to reckon with morality. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization that their lives, once intertwined, had diverged irreparably. As the confrontation reached its climax, Mark's voice wavered slightly. "I never intended to hurt you, Naomi. I thought that by making hard decisions, I was safeguarding our future." But Naomi's response was resolute and final. "You safeguarded an image, a facade that now crumbles before our eyes. I'm done being your accessory in a system that thrives on exclusion. I built Sky for All to represent the people who were once cast aside, and today, I reclaim that power." In that charged moment, as their eyes locked in a silent exchange of truths, Mark slowly slid a small folder across the table, a final attempt to justify years of compromise. Naomi picked it up, but with a steady hand she set it aside. "No more excuses, Mark," she said softly. "You destroyed everything you once claimed to build, and in doing so, you destroyed us." Outside the conference room, the city buzzed with the news of their confrontation. The media had caught wind of the exchange, and soon headlines spoke of a dramatic reckoning between the man of old elitism and the new champion of inclusivity. For Naomi, this final confrontation was not just a closure of a painful chapter, it was the sealing of a new identity. As she stepped out into the cool night, surrounded by supporters and the promise of a reformed future, she knew that her journey had reached its zenith. Standing beneath a starry sky, Naomi looked back one last time at the remnants of her past. "I held up a mirror to the world," she whispered to herself, "and the reflection has changed forever." In that transformative moment, she embraced the future with a quiet certainty. The era of exclusion was over, and a revolution of compassion, equity, and dignity had truly begun. In the aftermath of a long and arduous battle, Naomi Williams stood as a living testament to the transformative power of resilience, courage, and unyielding conviction. Her journey, from the crushing humiliation of being forcibly removed from a plane, to the searing betrayal of a partner she once trusted, and finally to a triumphant courtroom victory, had reshaped not only her destiny but also the very landscape of an industry steeped in exclusion. Naomi's relentless pursuit of justice forced a long-hidden system of discrimination into the unforgiving light of day. With every document revealed, every statistic laid bare, and every personal scar recounted, she dismantled a structure built on prejudice and indifference. Her unwavering determination catalyzed a revolution that transcended boardrooms and courtrooms alike, inspiring countless individuals to reclaim their dignity and demand a more inclusive future. The creation and soaring success of Sky for All were the living embodiments of Naomi's vision, a vision where luxury and equality were no longer mutually exclusive, but rather inseparable. Through meticulous design, compassionate customer care, and a steadfast commitment to fairness, she transformed an industry known for its rigid hierarchies into one that celebrated diversity and championed the rights of every traveler. Sky for All wasn't just an airline, it was a beacon of hope, a tangible declaration that every person deserved to be seen, respected, and valued. As Naomi reflected on her tumultuous past and the victories hard won, she understood that the struggle for justice was an ever-evolving journey. The echoes of past battles would continue to serve as reminders of the cost of complacency, urging her, and the world, to remain vigilant. Yet, in that vigilance lay the promise of an uncharted future where inclusion, empathy, and mutual respect became the cornerstones of a society that had once thrived on exclusion. Now, as the sun rose on a new era of possibility, Naomi Williams looked forward with hope and determination. Her legacy was no longer defined by the wounds of the past, but by the unbreakable spirit that transformed pain into progress. The road ahead was long, and challenges would undoubtedly arise, but the revolution she ignited had forever altered the narrative of what it means to belong. In the final reckoning, Naomi had done more than reclaim her own dignity. She had ignited a movement that promised to reshape the world, one flight, one policy, and one human life at a time. And so, as the echoes of her triumph reverberated through the corridors of power, a new dawn of equality began to shine, lighting the way for a future where every person could travel, live, and dream freely, without the weight of prejudice holding them back. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment speech balloon to share your thoughts. Your support means the world and helps us create even more amazing content. Stay tuned for more exciting stories. See you in the next video.